Good afternoon and welcome to the Osterville Village Library. My name is Amy Wolf. I'm the programming director here at the OVL. Thank you so much for joining us today. This afternoon, we have the honor of hosting Peter Trull, a world-renowned naturalist, educator, photographer, and author. Peter Trull has dedicated over 40 years towards capturing and sharing the raw beauty of the animals and landscape around him. Today, he is here to discuss the Eastern Coyote and Eastern Coy wolves of Cape Cod.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Good. I'm glad you're here. Appreciate you coming. I always start with this slide, not to impress anyone, but to tell you that in your life, no matter how long you've been alive or no matter how much you have loved a particular subject, there is always someone who can change it in an instant. And several years ago, Dr. Goodall was doing a lecture series, spoke at the college. I was teaching at the Cape Cod Lighthouse Charter School, 7th grade, 12-year-olds, biology and science. And the phone rang in the office, and the office said, Peter, Dr. Goodall's organization is here, and she is interested in our program, Roots and Shoots, which is her world-renowned program, and that she would like to be escorted around Cape Cod Bay, the flats of Cape Cod Bay by you tomorrow. So I spent 30 minutes walking around on Brewster Flats with Dr. Goodall. She was talking about her research, of course, in Africa, and I talked about my research in Guyana, where I lived with market trappers eating all of the birds that we protect here in the Northeast. And she said, I can't quite say, I don't want to say it was a sermon, but she spoke to me about the love of animals and the respect of the earth and animals. And it just changed the way I do everything with my lectures and groups now. I love birds. I've been working with seabirds and birds forever, for half a century. And I always would go and, you go birding and you see this bird and you see that bird and you point them out. And ever since I met Dr. Goodall, I do field classes and talk about the lives of birds. Who is that bird? What day of the year is it? And why is that bird behaving the way it's behaving on this particular day? And amazingly, it's all real. Went out this morning on a field class, and every bird that we saw was in a state of transition. They were no longer interested in nesting. They were no longer interested in feeding their young. The summer is over. They're in a period called post-breeding dispersal. There's just so much to learn about nature, whether you're an entomologist studying insects or studying fish, whatever it may be. But one person can change the way that you see everything in your life. And that's what Dr. Goodall did in that 30 minutes that I spent with her. I was standing out there on the Brewster Flats, and her entourage pulled up with the photographers. And she opened the car door, and she got out, and she went, "Peter!" And of course, I was melting. All right, so let's talk about the Eastern Coyote. It was 1989. 30-odd something years ago, I was at the Cape Cod Museum of Natural History as one of the directors, and a Harwich dog officer came into my office with a lactating female Eastern Coyote. I had never seen an Eastern Coyote on the Cape. I'd only ever seen one in the back of a pickup truck that was picked up on the Mass Pike out near the Berkshires somewhere. And I went from having never seen one or known about them on Cape Cod to having a road-killed lactating female at my feet, knowing, of course, they're breeding on Cape Cod, and they were puppies somewhere. And so it was that day that I really started looking, funding, and observing and tracking and following Eastern Coyotes on Cape Cod, and I've been doing it ever since. They are a dog. That's one of the most important things that I can tell you today, that this animal is a dog. It acts like a dog, behaves like a dog, interacts with dogs. It's a canine. It won't bite you or attack you. The pit bull or the Rottweiler or the Doberman or the German Shepherd may, but this animal won't. This animal has no concern for humans, lives in our woodlands, just another wild animal. like a raccoon or a red fox or a red-tailed hawk. It's just that it's a dog, and that leads people to formulate a lot of misconceptions about it when they see one. And you could see one anywhere on Cape Cod. This is what we're used to when we think about coyotes. We think of the West, we think of Utah, Arizona, Wyoming, roadrunners. But it was over, and this is a Western coyote. So when you say the word coyote from here on out, from today onward, you're talking about this animal, this little jackal-like creature that lives in the deserts of Arizona and Southern California. It adult weighs about 22 to 26 pounds, jackal-like in its behavior and appearance. That's in Arizona. This is what we find on Cape Cod. Quite a different animal. Quite a different animal. 20 to 30% larger, more wolf-like in appearance. This is a pair that I knew very well, photographed them for about 2 years. They had a litter in a bog near my house in Brewster, and I could easily go out on any given morning, squeak them in. They would just come trotting out of the woods, say, oh, it's the guy in the truck. And I spent a lot of time with these animals, but look at them. They're robust, but they're all fur. There are no 70-pound coyotes. There are no coyotes as big as German Shepherds. These are small, thin-legged, thin-bodied, heavily pelaged, heavily furred wild canids. Oh, and by the way, I'm not the kind of guy that says save your questions to the end. Anything you have to say while I'm talking, say it. Yes.
What's their weight?
I'm going to tell you in a minute. All right, it's coming. We're going to get to that. So it's about 150 years that the Western coyote increased its range due to high breeding success. Western coyotes can survive through anything. They eat garbage, they eat mice, they eat birds, they eat eggs, they eat anything they can find. They're extremely successful. The sheep ranchers of Colorado lobbied about 30 years ago to kill as many coyotes as the state could. The state funded it. They killed thousands, even to the extent of using treble hooks on wires in the dens to pull out the puppies. And the breeding population litter size grew from 3 to 6 to 9 to 11. The more you affect them, the more they respond. They're extremely successful. So they followed the miners into Canada. They followed the Western coyotes. They followed the Western coyotes, traveled up through Canada, expanding their range eastward. And as soon as they got into Canada, of course, northern Montana, they began to interbreed with what we used to call timber wolves. They're not called timber wolves anymore. They're called Eastern wolves, Canis lycaon. And so we had ourselves a new canid. For about 100 years, these animals have been moving through Texas, through the Ohio River Valley, through southern Canada, interbreeding with resident Eastern wolves, creating an animal that we now have walking around in all of Eastern North America. And we call it an Eastern coyote. Now, there's a young fella, not a young fella, everybody's a young fella to me. This fella in Barnstable called Jonathan Way, got his PhD in the last 10 or 15 years, radio collaring animals in Barnstable, did a lot of incredible studies. He recently published a paper along with the geneticist that I work with in Canada, Dr. Bradley White, suggesting that we call this animal coy wolf, because it's a hybrid between a Western coyote and an Eastern wolf. He even published a suggested binomial nomenclature calling it Canis oriens, the wolf of the East. Hasn't been changed yet, but the paper's been published. It's an interesting thought. So here's your classic Eastern coyote. This is an animal that we see here on Cape Cod. All of my photographs of Eastern coyotes were made locally here, mostly in Brewster and the Outer Cape. But you can see the shorter ears. The chest looks a little bit bigger. It's got a black-tipped tail. Still got the coyote redness on the legs, the black shoulder saddle, the red around the ears and the snout. But it's certainly not that Western coyote that you saw from Southern California. I started taking samples, tissue samples from roadkills. I had all through the 90s and into the early 2000s, I had little signs at all the police stations that said, if there's a roadkill reported, please call me this number. And I would go and do genetic sampling, take samples of tissue. And I was working with the forensics and genetics lab at Trent University in Canada. At the time, it was called McAllister University, or McMaster, I should say, McMaster University. And they were doing these sequencing these genetic samples for me for nothing because they were also doing a lot of intensive study on eastern wolves in southern Ontario. And so we were sort of working cooperatively, and they sent me any sequencing that I asked them for. And I think I have some to show you. So here's one report from Trent. These are animals that I just one sample of animals I collected. You can see there's Truro, Harwich, Eastham, Dennis, Bourne, Chatham. Some was muscle tissue, some was bone, some was hide. Where I found them. Some were juveniles, some were adults. And here are the results. Now this is 2000 and 2001. That's 25 years ago. So if you're thinking about eastern coyotes on the Cape today, this is what was happening 25 years ago on the Cape, but the data is significant. So we're looking at mitochondrial DNA. For those of you that aren't familiar with it, mtDNA is DNA that is passed down through the female of the breeding pair. So what this tells us is that the Eastham jaw and skull of the eastern coyote I found dead there, at some point in its previous generations, there was an eastern wolf. One of the females was an eastern wolf, and so on through Dennis and Harwich, another Eastham. So clearly, any what you or people call coyotes on the Cape are really not coyotes at all. They're eastern coyotes or coy wolves. And papers have been published that show the Northeast North American coy wolves are the largest in the country, bigger than any of the southern or mid-Atlantic states, bigger than any of the Ohio River Valley animals. The Northeast, especially Maine, tends to have the largest eastern coyotes. Largest just being a word, not with any particular meaning in this case. John Way, who I mentioned earlier, is working with the Maine Wolf Coalition to get the Maine Division of Fisheries and Wildlife to stop allowing eastern coyotes to be shot throughout the year, because he feels that a lot of the animals that hunters are shooting as eastern coyotes are in fact eastern wolves that are just simply coming in from Ontario, because the eastern wolves are also increasing their range. So in Maine, there are people working to prove or to document wolves, pure eastern wolves in Maine.
So what's the reference population for wolves? Is that defined in Canada very well? I mean, since all of these interbreeds,
Yeah.
dogs,
Yeah.
coyotes, wolves, all these canids.
Yeah.
Where in the world, where in North America is there a reference wolf population?
Well, we know that the gray wolf, the big wolf, the northern wolf that's we see jumping from ice floe to ice floe, killing caribou and musk oxen, they pretty much have a circumpolar distribution. They're found throughout the entire northern climates. They also have interbred, and we have found the DNA in eastern wolves that pretty much range through central Canada. They are an American wolf. Lewis and Clark identified them in Montana. Their main population now, I think, is probably Algonquin Park in southern Ontario. There was a lot of work done by a fellow called David Meek a long time ago, 30 years ago, and he called these animals gray wolves. And some of the research that's been done at Trent University now has said, well, geez, you know, David, they're not really, they're really eastern wolves. They're timber wolves, Michigan and Minnesota. So So the gray wolf is the high Arctic species. The eastern wolf is below probably boreal forest and southern woodlands of mixed woodlands of Canada, all through Ontario, all the way out through. And of course, we have the hybrid here in Eastern and throughout North America now. And so we're even finding domestic dog now in these Eastern coyotes. And I'll show you a good picture in a minute. So this just shows us that 25 years ago, we were still finding animals here on the Cape whose recent ancestors were Canis lycae on the eastern wolf. Yes.
And the interpretation there on that slide, some do show eastern wolf and most of them show coyote.
Yeah.
Is that
What they found was the coyote, the DNA that sequenced out as pure coyote was most similar to coyotes found in Texas, which is interesting, which might suggest that they came up through the Ohio River Valley into New York and New England.
the animal itself was actually an eastern coyote?
Eastern coyote, yes. It's what people around here call coyotes, but they're not. And it's hard to get people to call them eastern coyotes or coy wolves instead of coyotes, but whatever, I don't mind. So here's a perfect example. So this was last year. This was in Provincetown. William Mullen, who is the director of the Provincetown Conservation Trust, called me and said, there's a beautiful male coyote out behind the condos, spotless, not a mark on it, just laying in the sand. And we did a little bit of sort of hypotheses, and we figured that all these condominiums are putting out rat poison all over the place. And so this animal probably died of rodenticide poisoning, probably eating all the decon it could find. It's a beautiful male. Now look at it. Now you'd look at that and you say, that's a big coyote. And sometimes when I had William hold the scale or take a picture with my camera of the scale just so I could show it. And then I thought to myself, you know what? I don't need to prove how big it is. How much you think that animal weighs? And I don't mind what your guess is because I'm not going to laugh at you. What do you think? Huh? 37 pounds. Yeah, good guess. So this is a beautiful male coyote. This is pristine male coyote. If Eastern coyote, if people saw this, they would say, oh, as big as a German Shepherd. Oh, it's 60, 70 pounds. But they're not. They're much smaller. I've weighed hundreds, well over 100, maybe not hundreds plural, but well over 100 Eastern coyotes in the last 30 years from all over the Cape. And I can tell you that a female Eastern coyote averages between 25 and 37 pounds, and a male Eastern coyote weighs between 35 and 45 pounds. I have found one that was 48 pounds. Jonathan Way live trapped a female on Sandy Neck that was 52 pounds. And he published it and it has to date been the largest Eastern coyote live captured and weighed. So they're really in the 30 to 40 pound range, every one of them that you see. And there's no argument. Like I said, I've never found one over 48 pounds. And I'm a roadkill guy. I weigh everything. I got the scale and the gloves in my car. I was in Harwich and somebody called me on the phone and said, Trull, there's a dead Eastern coyote over by such and such nursing home. So I went over there. It's laying on the side of the road. This is true. This was just last fall. And it was in front of someone's house. So, I pulled over, took out the scale, put my purple gloves on, and the family came out, guy and his wife, woman was carrying a little kid. And of course I was kind of on their property. So the guy said, excuse me, can I help you? And I said, yeah, I'm going to weigh this dead Eastern coyote. And the first thing the woman said was, it's huge. First thing she said, weighed 27 pounds. It's a female. Beautiful little female hit by a car. They're all within the 25 to 45 pound. Really, I should say 32 to 45 pound range. So here's a great shot. So you talk about the interaction with domestic dogs. Here's a coyote with a white tipped tail. This was out on the outer beach at Nauset, way down by Chatham. I was driving, looking for owls. I was birding in the winter. And this animal, came up over the dune and then dropped back down onto the beach. So I maneuvered my car, my truck down the beach. I looked down the beach and there it was, way down there, just trotting along the outer beach. So I got my truck, went back, came up over the dune and started squeaking. And this thing just stopped. Now, doesn't that look like somebody's pet? Doesn't that look doggish? It's an Eastern Coyote. It's the only one I've ever seen with a white-tipped tail, although at some of my program lectures, people have said, oh, I've seen one in Eastham with a white, so apparently they're out there, but not very frequently. This is a good, to me, indication of integration with domestic dogs. How often? Probably not very, but if there's a female, someone's pet that's in heat and she's outside, she'll mate with an Eastern Coyote. Same as if there's somebody's male dog is out there running around and there's a female coyote in heat, they'll breed. But that's a pretty handsome Eastern Coyote. This is more typical. This is more typical of when you see one trotting along, you stop your car and start squeaking. By the way, if you are photographers and you have the camera in your car or binoculars, and you see an Eastern Coyote, you just simply stop the car, roll down the window, and start squeaking. And this is the response that you'll get. They stop in their tracks and stare you down. That's in Eastham on a winter day. So, of course, they kill livestock. There is a law in Massachusetts that has existed since colonial times, since the 1600s. It's still on the books today. Any farmer or landowner that finds any wild animal destroying anything that has value on their property, they can take it out. And that holds still today. There are people in Eastham that I know that put hot dogs on their deck to get a coyote up on them so they can shoot it. Hunters in deer stands that are hunting deer, if a coyote walks by, they're going to shoot it. People have a lot of misconceptions and bizarre ideas about Eastern coyotes. Most of them are just completely mumbo jumbo. But yes, they will eat your chickens. There's no question about it. This fellow is a commercial fisherman. You can see he's got a big gill net, got some kind of netting all over his chicken coop. But he still lost chickens to Eastern coyotes. In fact, Dr. Morgan, she used to be the Brewster vet. She told me that one day she was out with her chickens and the Eastern coyote was just sitting there like a dog on its haunches watching her. I'm going to tell you a quick story. I had a call from a woman. Actually, it was an email. She said, the Eastern coyotes are going into my small barn every night and harassing my horses. She said, I can't close the barn door. It's an old barn. There's a crack about 18 inches wide. They just go in there and I hear the horses stomping and whinnying. She said, I'm afraid they're going to hurt my horses. And I said, I can't imagine an Eastern coyote is going to go into your barn to harass your horses. And she said, oh, the horses are stomping. And I said, okay, well, let's investigate. So we did. We spent several nights and it was a rainy, and we never found anything, but it was a rainy night when we went in the next morning and found the Eastern coyote tracks going right into the barn, into the stall. Because, if you have horses or people with horses, there's usually a string with a clip across the front of the horse's stall, and each horse is in its individual stall. Well, the tracks went right into the stall where the horse was, no doubt angry that the Eastern coyote was there. And all we could see were two rear footprints of the Eastern coyote on the feedback. So this Eastern coyote was going into the horse stall, jumping up, putting its front feet over the bag of sweet oats and just chowing down on the horse's sweet oats while the horse was throwing a fit. So they're very opportunistic. To say the least.
When you had that call, in camera trap.
The trouble with camera traps on the Cape is people who walk their dogs in wild places think they're hunters' camera traps and they steal them. All my camera traps get stolen. I mean, it's a drag, but they do. I live in Brewster. I go into the Punkhorn. I put cameras up in good places. And they're gone within a week. And somebody said it's because people who walk their dogs, first of all, nobody wants anyone hunting in Punkhorn and Brewster. it's a big town thing about it. And I've had so many traps stolen. But yeah, I've got tons of great pictures of Eastern Coyote on camera traps. They're easy because they're path followers. That's the other thing to remember. They're path followers. They're not bushwhacking. They're going down the driveway, going down the road, going down the power lines, going down the game trails. They follow paths wherever they go. They'll go through your yard, sure, but they'll come out on the street and then walk down the road. You'll be sitting there drinking coffee at 6 a.m. and right down the road in front of your house, there'll be an Eastern Coyote just trotting along. So people have a real concern about their dogs. And interestingly, when I first started my research on Eastern Coyotes, it was because a lot of people in Eastham were losing their dogs to Eastern Coyotes. It's making the newspaper all the time. Police were calling me. All these dogs and more, poodles, dachshunds, basset hounds, West Highland, Jack Russell, they were all bred in Europe. They're all European breeds to chase rats during the Middle Ages when the bubonic plague was wiping out all of Europe. So every small dog, argue with me if you want, but it won't matter because all small dogs were bred to do one thing, and that's chase. You ever see a beagle on a rabbit? They'll run from here to Vermont chasing a rabbit. All small dogs were bred to chase. So I sat with over 23 people over a period of a year and a half at their kitchen table. They were saddened by the loss of their dog. It makes me sad to think about having a little dog killed by an Eastern Coyote. Every scenario was the same. Drinking my coffee, didn't put the leash on, let the dog out to do his business. Dog saw, smelled, heard something, investigated. It was an Eastern Coyote. They chased it. Coyote ran like the devil, finally turned around, grabbed the dog, shake it violently, drop it, and walk away. Threat neutralized. Dog owner goes out, finds their beautiful little white West Highland Terrier all bloody and dead or injured and crying. And the headlines the next day, Channel 5 News, brutal coyote attack on beloved pet. And yet it's the dog owner's responsibility. In my guide that I wrote, I just finished my second informational guide, the law of the leash. Don't let your dog out. If it's a big dog, they'll probably play. But if it's a little dog, the little dog will chase it until the coyote finally gets fed up, turns around, shakes it, drops it, and walks away.
Has anyone found dog in coyote scat?
Not that I know of. Not that I know of. Most of it's been tissue sampling, genetic stuff. That's mostly hormonal stuff, I think, in scat that you find. But you do find, you're talking about physical remains. Yeah, not that I know of. No, I did a lot of scat sampling, but unfortunately, it was probably Hurricane Bob. It was one of those big storms where we lost power for several days. And, and first of all, Carol wasn't happy about it being in the freezer. And second of all, when the power went out for 6 or 7 days, I had to get rid of it all. But anyway, not that I know of. But, you could go, first of all, let me tell you also this. Google is not research. Okay, don't go, oh, let me research that. I'll go on Google. Google is just stuff. Google is just anything. If you want to read peer-reviewed scientific papers from journals, you go to Google and you write scholar. You'll get Google Scholar, and you get all. You usually have to join some kind of an organization or a group, but you'll get all peer-reviewed research from the journals done by professional scientists. So that's really where you get your information on, is from Google Scholar. But anyway, big dogs often play with coyotes. I witnessed it myself with my golden retriever. There's a classic Eastern Coyote jumping across a creek in a bog. Beautiful animal, probably about 35, 38 pounds, maybe 40. Nice male. How many animals do you think this thing's killed today? Why aren't there any more Bob Whites on the Cape? That's why. Why don't I ever find ruffed grouse on the Cape? That's why. Cats kill everything that moves in front of them. You let your cat outside, there isn't a grasshopper, a snake, a butterfly, an animal, a chipmunk. The thing that irks me the most is when people go, oh, it was so cute to see my cat. He killed a chipmunk and the chipmunk was crying and trying to get away. And yeah, outdoor cats are the scourge of the Cape Cod woodlands. So keep your cat indoors. Oh, and by the way, this is what I hear, and this is not a major affront to anyone in this room. Oh, my cat has to go outside. Oh, my cat won't stay inside. Oh, I have to let it out. You know what that translates to me? I don't want to bend over and pick up cat shit out of out of a bucket. Clean your kitty litter, keep your cat inside. They belong on your lap purring, not outdoors killing grasshoppers and birds. Millions of birds. Oh, speak of the devil. I had this guy in my neighborhood, this old codger had 4 mangy, awful, dirty, big cats that always roamed around. Used to spray our basement door, made me so mad. So one day in my yard, I see cats cough up fur balls. You've heard of that, right? Well, I watched this cat, big, gray, ugly thing. I couldn't do anything about it. Tried to catch him in a have-a-heart, take him to, the Animal Rescue League. They were too smart. So I watched it cough up this, and look at up there in the top of the screen are little friskies. At the end of it is a Baltimore Oriole head. This is what happens when you let your cats outside. They kill everything. Might even be 2 Baltimore Oriole heads now that I mention it, because there's another beak right there. 2 skulls, one here, one there. So all this cat was doing is roaming, and there were 4 of them, roaming the neighborhood, killing everything that moved. Meanwhile, the coyotes are pouncing on their prey. They find mice, they eat a lot of meadow voles, white-footed mice, chipmunks, squirrels, rabbits. They're small mammal eaters. The white-footed mouse on the left is the woodland mouse. That's in your wood pile and gets into your house in the winter when you're not there. The mouse on the right is the meadow vole, Microtus. That's the little mouse that lives in all the fields and lawns and woodland edges. They're both prey items. They're both sexually mature at about 23 days, and they're both producing 18 to 20 young every 25 or 30 days. I mean, they are food items for everybody. If you think rabbits are impressive, these little mice are more so. That's the principal food of Eastern Coyote, as well as red-tailed hawks, Cooper's hawks, broad-winged hawks, everybody, crows, great blue herons. We often find eastern coyotes along the outer beaches. If you were to go to your favorite beach tomorrow morning and walk along the edge of the dune line, you would find a nice straight line, dainty, round, plum-sized tracks. That's an eastern coyote that was patrolling the beach a few hours earlier than you got there. Here's a small female just sitting on the beach at Race Point, staring at the sea. My friend Blair Nicola made this photograph when he was birding up there at Race Point. I had to crop the picture because 10 feet to the right of this eastern coyote is a fisherman. But I could see his entire face. I had no idea who it was because Blair took the picture. So I couldn't publish the picture of the fisherman because you can't photograph human beings unless you have whatever they're called, a permit or a personal note that they allow you to do that. So I just cropped the photograph. But this little female eastern coyote was just sitting 20 feet off to the left of this guy who was throwing probably squid or clams into the water, waiting to get something thrown at it for food. My friend Peter Flood took this also on Race Point Beach. There's an eastern coyote eating a dead gray seal that had washed up. Handsome animal. Look at those long, spindly legs, long tail, black tip, gray, black shoulder saddle. red on the nose, red on the legs. Classic Eastern Coyote. That's the animal that we see every day. Dowses Beach, Craigville Beach, Barnstable, anywhere. There's a species of seal called a harp seal. The adults are huge. They're high Arctic seals. They're the big black and white seals with the big harp shape on their back. The newborn pups are the ones that the Canadians and the Russians slaughter by the thousands on the ice floes at the Gulf of St. Lawrence. This is an ice floe seal. In some years, the 1-year-olds who are not old enough to breed will just disperse south, and we'll find them in the winter on our outer beaches from Provincetown to Chatham. But they don't sit on the edge of the water like gray seals and harbor seals. Because they're ice floe seals, they come right up onto the beach and they just lay there in the January sun. And sometimes if natural resources officers or people find them, they'll put string around it and say, don't harass this seal. But on any given winter day, you can find these juvenile harp seals, white with black spots, on any outer beach day, January, February. But they're prey to Eastern coyotes. And we found this Eastern coyote killing this harp seal. My friend Blair and I were doing the same thing, going down the beach, photographing owls or whatever. We saw way down the beach, we saw 2 or 3 coyotes, and then they scattered. Eastern coyotes, they scattered. We drove down and we found this harp seal still alive. His head was pudding. They were killing it, and they obviously hadn't started to eat it yet. And as we came back up the beach several hours later, there was a truck there with some people that were going to take this seal and save it. And I said, you can't take this seal. And they said, oh, this is our mission. This seal is in distress. We can save it. It's still alive. We can stitch it and we can feed it and we can clean it. And I said, this is food. This is a food item. It's called predator-prey interaction. Blair and I saw the Eastern coyotes killing and eating this seal. He said, it's our mission. I said, listen, if you take this seal and put it in your car or truck and take it back to save it, those Eastern coyotes are just going to go a quarter mile down the beach and kill the next one they see. I said, so why don't you just leave this one here? And, I didn't want to sound like some kind of an authority or a boss or something, because they were youngsters, they were in their 20s, and they wouldn't. They said, nope, we're taking it. We're going to save it. And I said, have you ever studied biology? Food webs, interactions. You should just leave this seal, let the coyotes eat it. Nope. They said, nope, we're going to take it and we're going to save it. And that was the end of that. And off we went, and they should have left it. People who work with terns, as I did for many years for Mass Audubon, are always conscientious about predators. Who is the predator eating the eggs? Who is the predator killing the chicks? It's hard to tell. A lot of people these days see tracks of a particular mammal or bird in the colony and presume immediately that that's the reason. But through our research, we've learned that when these tern chicks hatch out of their eggs, they disappear. They just are led by their parents into the grass, or they just are gone. You can't find them. So there's a lot of misconceptions about interaction until 2 summers ago, when I was going out to study the terns at Gray's Beach in Yarmouthport. That's on Cape Cod Bay. That's where the long boardwalk goes out. There's huge habitat a mile out into that marsh where terns have nested historically. And I was just going out there to bird around, and I pulled my kayak up. And as I pulled my kayak up onto the peat, 100 meters or more from where the terns and plovers would be, up pops this Eastern coyote head out of the grass. And I went, oh, brother. And of course, it stared me down from a long way off, and then just casually turned around and trotted away across the salt marsh. So I pinpointed it visually. And what I found, first time ever documented, was that these are 2 piping plover eggs that you can see all of the Eastern coyote tracks. So this Eastern coyote had broken 2 piping plover eggs in half and licked out the contents. And we'd never seen that. And Eastern coyote's been on the Cape for, whoa, good catch, Peter, for a long time. but we've never been able to actually document them preying on terns or plovers. And so this was the confirmation. Yeah, they do. And if you'd have asked me, I would have said, oh, no, I don't think that they prey on tiny little eggs. These eggs were broken beautifully in half. You can see they look like 4 little bowls and licked out by the Eastern Coyote that I watched. So that's very interesting. So if anyone ever says to you that Eastern Coyotes don't eat the piping plover eggs, you have now seen visual proof that they do. It blew my mind. I was really surprised. Typical den. They use old fox dens. They'll den under a boat. I've had them denning under winter rentals, shower stalls, foundations, old foundations. If there's nobody in the house and they can get under it, they will, and they'll have their puppies there. Typically in April. Breeding is late January. And like all canids, it's a 63-day gestation period. So the pups are born in April, often before anyone that doesn't live on the Cape gets here. And I have so many calls every year. Oh, these people just came back to their house and there's coyotes denning underneath their deck. Yep. Well, they tell them to come back in a few weeks. It's, a lot of times they want to make them go away. They want to get rid of them. But what happens is if you do find a den, the female will move those pups right away. So I've found dens, or I've had people say, "Oh, Peter, there's an Eastern Coyote den over here at this location in Brewster or Yarmouth," and they'll say, "Oh, I saw the animals." But if I go there a single day later, just the presence of that person who observed them is enough to get the adults to move those pups to a new spot. Nancy Orby, who is a great wildlife photographer here on the Cape, a friend of mine, I wanted some pictures for my guide of puppies. And so she gave me these. She said, you can use them in your program lecture. So here's 4 pups, about 8 weeks old, outside the den, playing, frolicking around, Eastern Coyotes. Another one photographed out the window of my vehicle in Harwich. Beautiful animals. They're dogs. They do kill deer, not very often, but the Eastern wolf that they have interbred with are deer predators. And so the larger size of the Eastern Coyote allows them to, in some instances, be bold enough to take down deer. Typically, they're eating small mammals. If a deer is injured, if a deer has a broken leg, if a deer gets hit by a car and doesn't survive, if a hunter shoots a deer but can't find it, the Eastern Coyotes will find it. Whitetail. So I used to take my golden retriever and my chocolate lab to a bog in Brewster, and I would drive around in my truck and they would run beside me. And sometimes I would fling a ball for them. I got kicked out of the bog because Davenport bought the bog and they kicked me out. But it was a beautiful bog. It was my own personal lab for about 20 years. And one day I was with my dogs and I flung the ball for my dog, Gus. And he goes, I lost the ball, Dad, but I found this. It's just a rib cage of a white-tailed deer that was probably killed and eaten by Eastern Coyotes, because no hunter that I know that shoots a deer is going to leave a rack of ribs like that behind. So Gus was very proud of himself. I said, drop it, Gus. So this particular dog, I'm showing you this picture because one day, and I hate to paraphrase information by saying this is true, but sometimes I feel I need to, because I've done so many program lectures about Eastern Coyotes that people like to argue, which I love because I know what I'm talking about. I drove over here one day. I had Chocolate Lab and this guy, and I would let them out of my truck and they'd wait for me to start the truck and drive and they'd go running. The one day I let them out of the truck, it was about 5 PM. They bolted. They got out of the truck and just both took off around the corner because, bogs have these big sand pits. So I knew it was Eastern Coyotes. And so put it in park and go run after the dogs. And there's my 2 dogs and 2 Eastern Coyotes. My 2 dogs are standing. The male Eastern Coyote is like this. Got his feet stretched out in front of him, got his tail up in the air, wagging like crazy. So Gus takes off after him. Sonny, my chocolate lab, took off after the female in the woods, was gone. I watched this guy and a male Eastern Coyote run around chasing each other for about 15 minutes. If Gus got too close, the Eastern Coyote sped up. If Gus got tired, the Eastern Coyote would just slow down. You know, they were pure dog behavior. And that's what everyone has to keep in their heads. These animals are dogs. They do everything dogs do. They roll over on their back and rub their back. You know, they play like dogs. They behave like dogs. They bark like dogs. They're dogs. So many interactions in my life over the last 30 years of people who have big dogs that play with Eastern Coyotes. Lady in Wellfleet sends me an email. She says, every day, this Eastern Coyote sits at the end of my driveway waiting for me to let my black lab out. I let my black lab out and they just run around the yard, chasing, playing, no interaction, just chasing, playing. You could, any of you wonderful people, could go onto your favorite search engine and type in the words Eastern Coyote playing with dog or Eastern Coyote playing with dog tools. Do it when you get home. You'll be amazed at the videos that people have taken of, have any of you ever been to the Birdwatchers General Store in Orleans? Raise your hand if you know it. Well, Kathy Clark, who is the thin woman with the long hair, she was sitting on her couch watching TV. Am I boring anyone? She's sitting on her couch watching TV and she hears a commotion on her deck. She's got a big collie like Lassie. And so the dog goes over to the door and starts, whining. So Kathy goes over and there's an Eastern Coyote down with its front feet and its head underneath this sort of rattan couch that she had out on her deck. And so she chased, she said, oh, get out of here, chased it away. 5 minutes later, it was back. So she opened the door, she chased the Eastern Coyote off the deck and looked underneath the rattan couch, and there was this big 18-inch rawhide bone that she had for her collie. So Kathy, and when you go to Birdwatchers, you ask her to tell you the story. So she took the rawhide bone with her collie, walked right out into the yard to the Eastern Coyote that was just staring her down. And she said, is this what you're looking for? Is this what you want? And she flung it, and her collie and this Eastern Coyote just spent all this time just running around, romping, flinging it up in the air, chasing around the yard with a rawhide bone. Lassie and an Eastern Coyote. They're dogs. They act like dogs. They play like dogs. This is another one that you can see this one turned right around. This animal was walking up the road. I pulled over, started squeaking. What? Made a photograph. Beautiful animal in Provincetown. Look at the thickness of this animal's leg. This is a hardy Eastern Coyote. Tongue hanging out, just wondering what's going on. Classic, one of the animals I knew. You've seen a few pictures of this guy. This is the male. Here's a female. You can see it smaller, thinner, probably about 32 pounds. And that's the picture that most people like to see when they see a coyote, is Eastern Coyote walking away. And I think that does it. Thank you very, very much for listening and watching. Thank you. You don't have to. And if you have any questions, just ask away. Like